Okay, so what happens when a huge cyber attack hits a major national bank? Well, the official story you get is technical glitch. But the reality, the hidden truth, it's a full-blown data catastrophe. And that's the story we're getting into today, the battle between those two versions of the truth. It all kicks off with this really chilling, distorted message. It gets sent to one of the most important banks in the entire country, and it says, 10 days, or the silence becomes exposure. I mean, that's the ultimatum right there. And just like that, the clock starts ticking on what would become a massive national crisis. So let's set the scene. We're in Montevideo, Uruguay. It's late September 2025. And for everyone in the city, for the whole country really, it's just another day. No one has any idea that they're literally on the brink of a digital siege. All right, so how did the public first even hear about any of this? Well, it wasn't with some big, loud alarm. It was more like a carefully chosen whisper. And that brings us to our first section, an IT incident. This is where the official story begins. Okay, so on October 2nd, the Banco Hipotecario del Uruguay, everyone just calls it BHU, and it's a huge state-run bank. They put out a statement. They say their systems are down because of an incidente informático, an IT incident. You know, it's this very deliberately mild, super technical sounding term. It completely hides the absolute chaos that was actually going on behind the scenes. And right there, that's the heart of the whole thing. The official term they're using is IT incident. But the reality? Experts were calling it a secuestro digital, a digital kidnapping. And that massive, massive gap between those two phrases, that's where the story really gets interesting. Okay, so let's pull back the curtain on that official story. It's time to look at the real threat that was looming, one that was being measured in, well, gigabytes of silence. 700 gigabytes. Now, just to put that into perspective for you, when we're talking about text and documents, that is an absolutely colossal amount of information. This was no simple system crash. No way. This was a digital heist on an epic scale. So what exactly was in that massive data trove? Pretty much everything. You've got the personal info of over 50,000 clients. You've got accounting records, legal contracts, property documents, credit and risk files. Get this, they even stole the bank's own internal IT security plans. I mean, it was a totally catastrophic breach of trust. And the group behind this whole thing? They called themselves Crypto24. And these guys weren't your average thieves. They were specialists. Specialists in a particularly nasty tactic known as double extortion. So what is double extortion? Think of it like a brutal 1-2 punch. First, they sneak in and quietly steal all of your most valuable data. That's step one. Then they encrypt all your systems, locking you out completely. So now they can demand a ransom for two different things. One, for the key to unlock your own files, and two, for their promise not to leak all that sensitive data they just stole. It's all about creating maximum leverage. So you've got the official story on one side, and you've got the hacker's threat on the other. But then a third voice enters the picture. A counter-narrative starts to emerge, and it's from a very, very unlikely source. This is where Alberto Daniel Hill comes in. Now, his background gives him a pretty unique perspective on all this, because he was actually Uruguay's first ever convicted hacker. Yeah, it's a past that makes him a very unlikely critic, but also a perfectly positioned one. These days, Hill is a well-respected cybersecurity expert, and he started using that expertise to analyze the BHU attack, very publicly. He was one of the first to warn that calling this a simple IT incident wasn't just an understatement. It was dangerously, dangerously misleading. And Hill's whole analysis really boiled down to one powerful idea. He said, the real enemy is not the hacker, but institutional opacity. So for him, the true crime here wasn't just the data breach itself. It was the giant wall of secrecy the bank was building around it. In fact, Hill even gave the government's strategy a name. He called it the Protocol of Silence. And he argued that this was a deliberate choice, a choice to protect the institution's image, not the citizens whose data was now completely exposed. And, well, a strategy of silence can only work for so long when you're up against a ticking clock. The official story was about to completely fall apart. So let's walk through the timeline. September 30th, the attack happens, the clock starts. 2 days later,
BHU publicly calls it a minor IT incident. But then, just 2 days after that, Crypto24 goes public. They announce their attack and issue that 10-day ultimatum. The bank's response? Nothing. Total silence. The deadline came and went, and Crypto24 made good on their threat.
The threat was absolutely real. Crypto24 did exactly what they said they would do. They leaked all 700 gigabytes of that stolen data onto the internet for anyone to find. The silence was finally shattered, but not by the bank. It was broken by the criminals themselves. Everything Hill had been warning about, it was now a reality. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? Well, the fallout from this attack really reveals a fundamental conflict at the very heart of how our institutions operate. It's a battle between image and citizen data. Which brings us to the central question of this entire affair, right? Why the silence? I mean, why would an institution choose to hide the scale of a breach this catastrophic from the very people it's supposed to be serving? Well, according to analysts like Hill, the reasons are complex, but pretty troubling. Sure, maybe it's to avoid public panic. That's one possibility. But it could also be to hide systemic negligence, cover up past security failures. Or maybe it's just to protect the reputation of the bank's leadership. Or maybe it's just a deep-rooted institutional culture that always chooses secrecy over transparency. And this is really the fundamental conflict it all exposes. On one side, you have the institution's number one priority, protect the image of the system. But on the other side, you have the citizens' priority, protect the data of the people. And in this crisis, those two things were treated as if they were completely mutually exclusive. Which leaves all of us with a final, really crucial question. This is the takeaway from this whole story, and it applies to every single one of us, no matter where we live. When your personal data gets breached, who do you actually trust to tell you the whole truth? The institution that lost it in the first place? Or someone else?